Hello and welcome. Once again, I am Carla Gaines, the co-chair of the African American Opioid Coalition of Safe Communities, and I'll be your MC today. I am pleased to welcome you to the Ending Deaths from Despair webinar series. To our knowledge, it's the only one of its kind in the nation. So on behalf of the Dane County Executives Ending Deaths from Despair Task Force, we thank you for joining us and for being a part of the solution. The goal of this webinar is to save lives in Dane County, to help to set up a standard of communities around the nation grappling with deaths from despair, to understand what underlies these deaths from despair from the perspective of people in pain, and to provide tools to help to all helpers who are working to prevent them, and to lay the groundwork for continued conversation and action on how to make Dane County's mental health and substance abuse disorder treatment system accessible, culturally competent, and effective at eliminating all deaths from despair. Today's presentation of the series entitled Lock, Stock, and Barrel. I love that title, Lock, Stock, and Barrel, coming together on firearm safety and suicide prevention with a physician, a gun shop owner, and the community with Dr. James Bingham and Chuck Lovelace. Dr. James Bingham is a clinical associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at the University of Wisconsin. He graduated with degrees in zoology and religious studies from the UW-Madison before pursuing a medical degree and Master's of Public Health at the UW School of Medicine and Public Health. He strongly believes talking about firearm safety and gun ownership is an integral piece to a person's health care and is informed by the medical ethics of justice. Chuck Lovelace is the owner of Essential Shooting Supplies in Park Falls, Wisconsin, working as a gunsmith, lead firearms trainer. He is a certified marksmanship instructor and chief range safety officer and armorer's certification, as well as an instructor in close quarters defense marksmanship. He builds, repairs, and restores firearms of many types and vintages. Prior to becoming a small business owner, Chuck served in the Army as a staff sergeant, where he was a senior supply sergeant at a division command with duties as a senior armorer and weapons custodian for the Army Reserve Marksmanship Teamship. I wanted to just say thank you so much, Chuck, for your service to our country. Chuck has a long history of education in firearms and martial arts, where he holds a master's rank, owning his own school for 12 years prior to moving to northern Wisconsin. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Colorado Tech and an associate's in firearms technology from the Sorona Desert Institute. He is married with 2 adult sons and 2 spoiled shop dogs. Chuck worked closely with Safe Communities, Madison, Dane County, to start our gun shop project, building on the Safe Storage Initiative he founded and designed, which is an initiative for gun shop owners to provide safe, temporary storage of firearms for people experiencing a suicide crisis. He worked to develop guidelines to facilitate a process of safe storage, which has been adopted by the VA, and now more than 30 gun shops statewide provide safe storage of firearms. That is amazing. I'm so excited about this workshop coming up. We also have Jean Papalia with us as the moderator for today's webinar. Jean has been a suicide prevention specialist for Safe Communities for over the past 14 years. She served as a city police officer for 26 years before retiring, and now spends her time as a suicide prevention trainer teaching QPR. She worked closely with Chuck Lovelace to start the Safe Storage Initiative and was part of the Wisconsin's Governor's Challenge to prevent suicide among service members, veterans, and their families, which has spread safe storage across the state. Today's topic can be a hard one to discuss, but it's also an important one. Our goal for this webinar is to get you started thinking about firearms in a way that isn't confrontational, but respectful, and in a way that inspires you to learn more. We are so lucky and honored to have Dr. Bingham here today talking about his approach to discussing firearms from a clinical perspective, and also tearing down some of the misconceptions the medical community may still have about safe storage, and to have Chuck here, a part of this conversation as a subject matter expert on the firearms culture.
Thank you all for being here today and joining us in this conversation. We're starting this conversation because we lose over 900 people a year to suicide in Wisconsin, and over half of these deaths are firearm suicides. In fact, speaking of firearms, 71% of the deaths in Wisconsin are firearm deaths from suicide. So let's take down one of these myths. Firearm suicides are the number one cause of death by firearm. It's not homicide, it's not mass shootings, school shootings, or accidental deaths. We believe that through safe storage, we can have a meaningful way to lower that number. We're aware that 4 in 10 households have a gun, and that firearm ownership is part of a rich history in Wisconsin and nationally. We're going to be talking about lethal means safety. So lethal means safety is an evidence-based approach and best practice for saving lives from suicide. It is an approach where firearms are temporarily removed from a home, or there's a change in home storage to limit the access to a firearm for the short time a person may be most at risk for suicide. The key concept in this is voluntary, short-term, safe storage, and it's with the person at risk being the leader in taking control of their own health with support from others. This is about discussions and options and prevention strategies. This is a way that we can work together to reduce deaths. This does not, however, negate the need for work on other prevention strategies, such as assessment and care for physical health, mental health, and taking suicide prevention trainings, which can help us identify other risk factors. That work needs to continue, but the temporary safe storage of firearms is a meaningful harm reduction. So one way to think about lethal means safety is that it's similar to a designated driver, which we're very familiar with. So in a designated driver program, we realized that at that moment in time, someone who's had too much alcohol is at risk for crashing, and that by giving them a safe ride home and leaving the car there, we can reduce the chances of something happening. But a designated driver program is not anti-driving, and it's not anti-drinking. In fact, the program springs from the alcohol industry. Rather, it's just acknowledging that the way to keep a person safe at that moment in time involves mitigating the risk. The goal of our webinar is to bridge that understanding between physicians who are looking at wellness and life-sustaining care for their patients, and also to share with you an understanding of the firearm culture and the role it plays in discussing lethal means safety. Chuck, I'm so glad to have you here today. I feel like there's such a misunderstanding about the firearm culture. People just don't seem to realize the unique role that firearms play, whether it's hunting with family members as a valued tradition, or recognizing that firearms are collectibles and valuables, and that they're a unique piece of engineering. They can be standard equipment for some jobs, including farmers and people in employment like the military and law enforcement. But there always seems to be a somewhat abrasive comment about how many and where they are in your home. So tell us a little bit more about the firearm culture. And maybe you can share with us some of your perspective since you were in the military as well.
Hi, Jean. Thank you for having me here today. The firearms culture is kind of an amazing group of individuals because it's not just limited. So many times we hear, especially in today's unfortunate political environment, we hear of all this divisiveness of the left and the right. But I found out in the last almost 10 years of owning a gun shop that, whether a person is a Republican or a Democrat doesn't prevent them from enjoying the use of a firearm and hunting with it and using it as a means of not only enjoyment in the field, maybe target shooting or clay shooting, but also as a stress reliever for some people, especially individuals, veterans. I mean, the whole veteran lifestyle and the veteran community is very near and dear to my heart, obviously. I have a long history with the Army, and I have a lot of friends that are veterans, and a lot of us like to go and shoot and, be able to go out and not necessarily relive, but maybe, have a little bit of a feeling of community together shooting and, hunting and just enjoying that firearms industry sport. Sport shooting is another thing that is really popular now, where you're competitively shooting, against other individuals. So this community and the whole culture of firearms has evolved so much in the last 10 years, even, that I really feel like, this kind of conversation of giving a safe and simple way to allow for limited access to means during a time of crisis is essential, because a lot of people don't understand that sometimes you just need a break from it too.
Tell me where you came up with this idea for safe storage. I know that this is something you and I have discussed, and I believe that this actually sprang from a discussion where we were sitting next to each other at a breakfast, where we should have been spending more time listening to the keynote speaker, and instead we're whispering. Tell me your thoughts on how this got started.
Well, I kind of laugh now because the Milwaukee VA has turned this safe storage program that we kind of had as a baby in Dane County when we started, and they've made it statewide now. And when I was talking with the person who is the coordinator for the program for the Milwaukee VA, she said, well, how did you start this? And I said, well, funny enough, we took all the notes down on a napkin at a breakfast meeting because we didn't have any paper with us. And we kind of came up with the concept of, the Gun Shop Project is an amazing project for firearms retailers to be able to educate their employees and themselves in the signs of someone who may be in a potential suicidal crisis. And it allows you to better understand, certain things that they may or may not express to you while searching for a firearm. They walk in and they ask for a firearm. They want to buy a gun. Well, what caliber would you like? I don't care. Okay, what are you going to use it for? Oh, I don't know. They give very, very vague answers or very non-committal answers. And when you ask them, well, do you have experience with firearms? No. Well, are you interested in training? No. These are all really almost red flags for a retailer to be able to see these things. And so, the Gun Shop Project does an amazing job in educating retailers, but what it doesn't do is give you the potential for a solution, aside from denying a sale and offering suicide prevention literature at your store. Now, both of those are valuable, but the solution to me was, when people are involved in a crisis, a lot of times they don't want to get law enforcement involved. They don't want to call law enforcement and say, hey, I have a family member in a suicidal crisis, or, hey, I'm in a suicidal crisis and may attempt to hurt myself, so I need to get rid of my guns for a while. calling law enforcement doesn't always appeal to that person. So with the Safe Storage Initiative, we really just wanted to be able to provide a safe, anonymous way for people to come in and have a short-term storage solution for their firearms. When we bring them in, we identify them with a tag, and on the front of the tag, it's bright and shiny, so it's really easy to read in the camera here. But on the front of the tag, it just says ESS Safe Storage, not for sale. On the back of the tag, it has a serial number. That serial number we print and put onto the tag, and it goes into our logbook that we have specifically for the Safe Storage program. By doing that, we're tracking it with all federal laws being applied and making sure that we're following the ATF guidance as far as having the firearms on our property. But we're also giving the person who's using the program a little bit of anonymity, so they don't worry about somebody seeing Safe Storage program for, Dave Jones on here. It's just, it's a number on the tag. No one knows who that belongs to. One thing that we've done and always have said we would do at our shop is we allow people to come in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if they need to use the program. Now, that could be because we have a lot more vested in the program and the way we feel about it and the way we feel the necessity of the program. But most people don't realize that crisis happens at any time of the day. It's not just from 9 to 5. So if someone calls me at 11 o'clock at night and says, I really need to store my firearms, how do we do it? All I want to do with them at that point is I want to make sure that we get their firearms here, we get them logged in, and they're safe. I ask them to bring a trusted friend or family member with them. That way they've got someone there to witness that they're, taking this step towards their own mental health well-being, but that they also have a witness with them saying, okay, yes, we've taken them here. And then once we get them all logged in, we just ask them, okay, we're going to contact you in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whenever, just to check and see how you're doing. See if you're ready to receive your firearms back. Now, when they come back, we ask that they bring that same trusted friend or family member with. Not that we're asking for them to get a note from their doctor. Nothing wrong with that, Dr. B. Just not that we want to, have them bring us proof that they've received health care, to help solve the problem. But at least that trusted family member or friend can help alleviate our feelings so that they're not coming back, picking their firearms up, and then using them right away for self-harm. So when they come back, now, if they by chance brought any ammunition with them when they surrendered their firearms, we don't return it. For us, that's just a safety stopgap so that the unfortunate things that could happen in parking lots right after they receive them back do not happen. That's a personal choice we do at our shop. I'm not sure what other shops do. I feel that at this point, yes, they've received that help, but I'm not ready to give them the firearm and their ammunition at the same time walking out the door. We also do not sell them ammunition either. We just try to give it that, I guess, cooling off period so that they don't have the firearm and the ammunition right away together. Now, if they don't bring any ammunition, we can't control what they do. We can't control if they go to another gun shop or store in the area and purchase ammunition right away. But we try to do the best we can to help them and to help slow them down a little bit. And, we see that it's something that not only the veteran community really cares about, but the community at whole. Being up here in northern Wisconsin now, I've actually had my name referred to, the county public health office so that they have access to that. And I think that's great. And we try to share the program and the information with anybody that we run into that's a part of the medical community so that they know that it's available. Because the biggest disconnect we get a lot of times is between the gun shop and the medical community, because we don't interact hugely. Or if somebody comes into the gun shop from the medical community, they're not necessarily standing at the counter saying, well, I'm a doctor and this is what I do. No, they're here to buy what they want, and they're going to go. So being able to have the information out there with the public health offices, knowing that this program is available is also really important. And that's just a big part of when I was down in Dane County. Safe Communities helped me get the word out quite consistently. And now I'm just trying to do that up here. I don't have the platform of Safe Communities anymore, but, we try to get that program out there so people understand it's there and available.
Suppose someone comes into your gun shop, let's say during normal business hours, and they're talking about safe storage, and perhaps you may even feel that they could benefit, but they just can't come to that moment of separating themselves from their firearm. Are there other options that you can offer them through the gun shop?
Oh, absolutely.
Safes or something else?
Absolutely. There are trigger lock systems. There are, safes. There are all kinds of securing mechanisms that you can purchase on the market. Safes are getting smarter than people at this point. You can get biometric safes, you can get digital safes, but in the end, if it's locked up and it's locked up properly, it may make them more comfortable to be able to say, okay, I've got a lockbox for my handgun, and here's the key, and giving it to a family member or friend instead of bringing it to the shop. Now, if it's not a high security safe like we have for the safe storage program, we have a fire resistant, very expensive 48 gun safe that we use just for the program. Not everybody can afford those. Those run $1,200 plus. So, they may end up purchasing a $30 or $40 lockbox for their handgun. Is it going to be, what I would consider a truly secure and safe option? Well, no, it's just as effective as the locks on your front door from stopping burglars, because with a strong hammer, you can bust into it. But what it's giving again is that moment of pause, that stop moment, where if they don't have the key, at least they've got to think about a way to get it open. And maybe instead of trying to open it, they call that person with the key and they have a conversation. Because a lot of times, especially with people who have, made the decision that they want to perform self-harm, a lot of times their friends and family don't see it because they've come to terms with it. At least that's the things that I read. Dr. B, I'm sure will come into that more later. I don't want to step on his toes, but so sometimes their friends or family members may not understand that they're in that time of crisis. So having that stopgap is the key.
So you're, in essence, creating time and space between the firearm and the person in crisis, and hopefully allowing that crisis to pass.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing that we always try to express to people is safe storage is not about gun control. It's not about gun confiscation. It is about limiting access to the means of self-harm. Period.
Are there concerns? Well, I hear that there are concerns that suppose I won't get my gun back. And are you as a gun shop able to navigate the federal firearms licensing and ATF? Is it something that shops can legitimately do?
Oh, yes, absolutely. When we bring them in, we store them in a separate federal firearms logbook. And that book is fully inspectable by the ATF, but they're not required to, or they're not able to come in and make photocopies of it to determine, oh, well, if this was part of this program, we need to have photocopies of this, and we're going to deny the person their rights to receive that firearm back. That's not our job. Our job isn't to judge them as far as whether or not they're able to receive their firearms back. Our job is to safely and securely store them. And it's no different than we're bringing in a gun for gunsmithing or we're bringing in a gun for resale. It's simply a storage option. And as long as we've got our insurance paid up to date and we've got our logbooks up to date, there's no issues. I've spoken with my insurance company about this in the past, and they said treat it just like you would treat gunsmithing as far as coverage for insurance. So we take the step of putting it in a fire resistant safe. There's no such thing as fireproof, but a fire resistant safe, and we're fully insured. So really there's no, I guess, overall limitation for the customer receiving it back. Now, we have had a case where an individual was seeking care and they were told that they could no longer possess firearms. That was an interesting case to deal with. We ended up purchasing the firearms from them for resale in our store. And so it got the firearms out of their hands, and they were okay with it because they knew they shouldn't own a firearm at that point. They were far enough along in their care that they realized owning a firearm was not to their benefit.
So they ended up with the sale of the gun and the revenue from that, right?
They ended up with the sale of the gun, and we ended up with the inventory to put on our shelves. But we also ended up with a great peace of mind knowing that that firearm didn't go back with them.
Wow. Sounds great. All right. So you threw around a couple of terms. So let me ask you the difference between a gunsmith, an armorer, a federal firearms license. Tell me a little bit about each of those terms. I want people to feel comfortable when they're talking, to understand exactly what the role is or what your role is when you're at the gun shop.
So let's break it down into levels. A federal firearms license. You can get a federal firearms license and you can get a type 1 through type 7 license, depending on what you want to do. I personally have a manufacturer's license. So for that, it allows me not only to do gunsmithing and repairs on firearms, but it also allows me to build and manufacture firearms from scratch. So that's kind of like the master's degree level of a federal firearms license. Some people have just a reseller's license. That means that they can order firearms at a wholesale cost and bring them in and resell them to the public. And then some people, there's even a federal firearms license for manufacturing ammunition. And so you have all kinds of different opportunities and options as a federal firearms dealer. And all that information can be found on the website atf.gov. They'll go under different types of licenses that you can receive and, what the costs are affiliated with that. Now we talk about gunsmith and armorer. So that's kind of your master's degree and your bachelor's degree of repair in the firearms industry. An armorer is really someone who has gone through, say, a manufacturer's certification process where they can do repairs to a specific manufacturer's firearm. In the Army, every military unit that had firearms assigned to it usually would have an armorer assigned as well. And that was the person who was responsible for the maintenance of the firearms. If there was any major damage done to them or any major breakage, they would send it to a higher level of repair. That would be the gunsmith level. So a gunsmith not only, maintains and does simple repairs on firearms, but we also do things like manufacture parts on obsolete firearms. We do restorations, and, we can do much more technically advanced things for firearms repair and manufacture.
So, all right, more terminology. Do you mind?
Not at all. That's why I'm here.
Trigger locks, gun safes, are they the same thing?
No, not at all. So a trigger lock, for the lack of better terms, a trigger lock is something that simply prevents the trigger from being pulled. So with a lot of trigger locks, you can still operate the action. You still may be able to load the gun, but you can't pull the trigger. Now, it is a federal requirement for trigger locks to be provided with every firearm that's sold by a federal firearms dealer. Most counties have a safety program where they will give you free gun locks if you go to the sheriff's department and ask for them. But all those are really doing is locking it. They're not securing it. And that's the big difference. A trigger lock locks it from being able to be used. A safe secures it from someone else being able to take it and potentially remove that trigger lock by force.
Long gun, handgun, shotgun, rifle. I don't get it. Am I going to use the wrong term and it offend a firearms owner if I use the wrong term? Are they all the same? Is there a better term I could use? I don't want to sound like a fool when I'm talking to someone, particularly because they probably have more knowledge than maybe I do about firearms.
So there's a simple thing, long gun and handgun right there breaks it down into two categories, A and B. Now, with long guns, you do have rifles, you do have shotguns, and you have black powder rifles and shotguns. Those are three different classifications of a long gun. On the handgun side, you can have pistols and revolvers. A pistol is normally semi-automatic. A revolver has a cylinder, and then you've got your specialty Derringers and single shots. So in the end, if you bring it to long gun or handgun, you're keeping it down at that simplest level of explanation, and it allows you to still have a meaningful conversation with them without trying to be overly technical.
That makes it sound a lot easier, a lot doable. All right. I'm going to welcome in Dr. Bingham on this conversation. Why is it that we have a physician here on this conversation? I'll tell you, I know for sure from doing suicide prevention training that many people who die by suicide have seen their physician in the months preceding their suicide, meaning that there may be an opportunity for clinicians to be able to talk about firearm safety. So Dr. B, let me start out by asking, what's harder to talk about, sex, gender, or firearms?
Hey, thanks for that. What a lead in. Thank you so much for having me, Chuck. Thanks for what you had to share. That was really helpful for me, even just as I'm listening to hearing you talk about things. So it's really important that we're talking about these things, and it has become really politicized. So talking about firearms and guns has become this amazingly powerful wedge issue. And I think there's a lot of beliefs people have that they kind of bring into the room that often has led a lot of providers, a lot of physicians kind of to move away from wanting to talk about these things because it's politicized. In addition, your healthcare professionals are experts and they want to stay within their wheelhouse. And so if they start feeling like they're outside of their scope of practice, or where they feel like they can really talk in an intelligent and meaningful way, many times we shy away because we want to give good, evidence-based, solid information. And if we feel like we're not super sure, we're humans. And many of us will actually kind of I don't want to say shirk our responsibility, but we'll kind of sidestep maybe the most important thing for us to be talking about. So I actually teach, I have taught the residents at the Madison residency program about screening for firearm injury prevention. And I will tell you that they would affirm it is harder, more challenging for them, more anxiety inducing to talk about firearms and safe storage than anything else we talk about with patients. And we talk about all of the things because in primary care, all of it is our business. It's all our business. We talk about everything. And so part of it is, I think, the concern about, is it going to cause a rift in the relationship? Is someone going to feel like I'm coming for their gun, or that I'm going to put something in the chart that suddenly someone else is going to see? And then they're going to be basically on some kind of a master watch list. And understandably, we don't want to create concern or angst for our patients. We want to maintain that trusting relationship. And so sometimes I feel like we under ask, even though we are charged with this really important work of screening for mental health issues. And we really do need to get engaged when folks are describing that they're having suicidal ideation, or even if they have a plan to act on that.
So you talk about being politically charged. I got to ask you, do you ever get pushback from your patients when you start going down that little line? It starts out all fun and games and easy, and then all of a sudden, so let's talk about your firearm. What happens?
I would say most people are incredibly open. And part of this is actually the approach I take is I just make it part of my normal questions that I ask as part of a social history. And so I ask about tobacco, I ask about alcohol, recreational drugs, sexual health, and then intentionally, my next question is about firearms. And I simply ask, do you own any firearms? That's it. And then I wait to see what the answer is. I have had in the last calendar year, 2 people who have strongly pushed back. One person actually I watched grab on to like the handles of his chair, and he was like, the way I see it, it's none of your business. And I just politely responded, with all due respect, I think it's all my business. I had just screened for sexual health, and I have a bit of an informal style, so this might not work for every provider, but I actually said to this gentleman, I just asked you where you put your penis. I absolutely have the right to ask you about safe storage of a firearm in your home. Because, and then I joined that with why. Because I care about you and your safety. I care about the safety of your family. And we share a goal, which is no unintended user of your firearm. No one I know who owns a firearm wants someone injured with their gun. And so let's find the common ground. And then let's talk about, if we need to take some steps, what we can do. And I actually do a lot of like, I get it. You may be worried about a Second Amendment right. You might be worried about someone taking your gun. And it's really the medical ethic of justice that guides me here. People absolutely have a legal right to firearms.
So question for you, Dr. B.
Yeah.
Would it be better, instead of asking, do you have firearms in the home? Could it be better to maybe phrase it, if you have firearms in the home, do you have a safe way to store or secure them?
So that may be one approach for some folks. If someone is in a place where they feel there's going to be a lot of pushback, you could soften it. I tend to, as a primary care doc, I tend to really connect with my patients. And so when I ask that question, it comes on the heels of like, do you have any concerns about your sexual health or sexual function? So like, it's actually in line when I say any guns in the house. It just feels like we're like going through some of the social history. And I don't think it necessarily takes people aback. And really, I kind of do a bit of an aw shucks. Like, I get you might be concerned, like I'm coming for your gun, but actually I'm trying to protect your Second Amendment right by not having someone steal your gun during a break-in. And also, I have a life. I'm going to go watch the Brewers lose tonight. I'm not coming to your house to get your gun. So, I mean, and part of this is just, you do it enough, you kind of create like what feels like an authentic, not script, but just way of talking about this with a conversational style. And it really actually just kind of helps people feel like they can lean into the discussion and openly share. And what's telling to me is unless I've asked, I have no way of knowing if there's an unsecured firearm or a firearm that could be a potential risk for something life-threatening happening. And in the last couple of years, as I've really started making this just a standard question, I've had patients who tell me I have a gun, and when the time comes, I'm going to use it to end my life. If I hadn't asked, I never would have known. I've also had patients who are being treated for depression, who have kids in their home, who are adolescents also treated for depression, who are storing their firearms just up in the rafters in their basement. Ammo was separate, so you get some points for ammo separate, but ammo wasn't necessarily locked up and wasn't really, though it's slowed to go get the gun and then go get the ammo, that's not the kind of slowing. It's probably not slow enough as far as what we're talking about, trying to like disrupt a potential moment where someone could choose to end their life. We know it's minutes often between when someone makes the decision that they want to end their life and they act. For those who are on this webinar, who are healthcare professionals, one thing that has been a big learning for me that I think is important to realize is if someone survives their suicide attempt, they have a 90% chance of going on to live the rest of their life without death by suicide. 90%. When I was in my training as a resident, I remember like going to the ER when someone would overdose on Tylenol. And we had this really negative way of thinking about things. Like some people would say, like, why are we helping these people? Because they're just going to come back and try to end their lives later. And I am reformed. That was not a healthy way of thinking about that. That was 2 a.m., burnout brain. We think about our patients with compassion. We recognize if they can survive that crisis moment, they're likely to go on and live a meaningful life. Firearms are 90% effective at suicide completion. If we can get firearms out of that crisis moment, we really have a chance to save lives. And so for me, prevention, we can do a lot of curative stuff, but prevention is the way. If we can prevent something, I want to, because it's hard to put the pieces back together again afterwards.
Do you hear responses from your patients about why they feel safe storage, or not safe storage, but even just any type of storage? I use safe storage as meaning this program, but why they feel that storing their firearms really isn't an option. And do you have any reply for that? I'm just saying, because I know many people feel they need close access to their firearm because they have a strong sense of needing it for personal protection or safety.
Yeah, so I unpack what kind of guns you have and what are your thoughts about how you want to use it. My hunters are the best. They know the hunting season, and when it's not hunting season, things are secured. They also know what their gun is used for. They know their firearm is lethal because it takes down the deer that they have mounted, right? Or it got them whatever the bird is they were hunting. And so the hunters, in my experience, are the ones who really do a great job of like, yep, season's over, everything's secured, ammo's locked up, we're good to go. By virtue
and to tag onto that, hunters usually spend a lot more money on their firearms, and therefore they understand that they're protecting their investment as well as their firearm.
Yeah, and that's a good point I make, actually. It's a commonly stolen thing in a break-in. It's a firearm. It's actually a really valuable commodity. So by virtue of asking everybody, I can tell you most of my folks in Dane County who own firearms are actually securing their guns in a responsible fashion. The one area that's an interesting discussion is when folks have a handgun for personal protection because they want ready access in the event of a break-in. And so one thing we talk about is, what are some options for you for maybe just a specific gun safe? Maybe it's got a biometric or something like that, or a quick punch code. You can get into those things within like seconds. Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's like 4 seconds.
Absolutely. You're correct.
And I encourage, hey, during the delay, yell the F-bomb a bunch at the person, like get the F out of my house, boom, 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 I have my gun, right? So like, but the idea there is like, you're not probably going to keep that with the rest of your firearms. If you have long guns, especially, that's going to be its own specific safe probably. But it's also important, I think, just to recognize we have some data, some public health data around if you choose to use a firearm for self-protection, what the chances are actually of an unintended consequence. And so I actually try to educate patients on this as well, that sure, if there's a break and you feel like you need a firearm, fine. But just so you know, your chance of actually successfully using the firearm against an assailant in your home is like 1%. Your chance of injuring yourself or someone you love is maybe equal to actually getting the bad guy. And so there may be another way you want to approach this besides using your handgun. And that's simply just to say like, hey, we all have this like mental image in our brain about how it's going to go because it's going to be just like in the movies. It's never like in the movies. Like the world isn't like the movies. And also, if you shoot an assailant in your home, you also are going to live with the fact that like you may actually kill someone in your living room, and then that's your living room where you have someone who's now deceased. So I just try to help people take that next step out of like, what's the thought with your firearm? And it's not to say don't. It's simply to say like, let's have some data before you make that decision, because in the heat of the moment, there is no time to think. So you want to kind of have a pre-thought and a pre-planned process of what is the best method of maintaining safety in my home. Sorry, Chuck, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to touch in. I completely agree with what you're saying as far as the actual chances of someone successfully using it. But I also think that that's a great time, and it's not only a public service, but it's also in my mind, a mental health question of, have you received training? because there are so many people that will come in and buy a firearm. They'll come in and buy their first handgun from us. Well, would you like some training? No, I'm good. I can look on, my favorite answer is I can look on YouTube and find out everything I need. And that's just not true. There are so many amazing training programs out there and so many amazing training instructors nationwide now that you can receive really good training that may take a day or two to complete with them for a relatively small cost, $150, $200, and you're getting hands-on training from someone like myself or other professionals that, you know, we've fired guns not only, you know, recreationally, but professionally for decades. So we're going to give you the best options in our opinion. And remember, they're opinions. So everybody has a different opinion on how things go. But instead of, you know, buying that firearm and having that fancy biometric safe and, you know, going in and grabbing it, but then forgetting to maybe load it correctly or forgetting to, you know, train with it enough so that, like you said, if you end up trying to shoot at somebody, you may end up missing and, you know, not getting the training and realizing that just because you're firing at them doesn't mean the bullet's going to stop with them. You know, if your children are in a bedroom on the end of the hall, that bullet may still travel through that and you may unintentionally damage your own, you know, or kill your own child. That's a horrific thought to me. It really is. And when I've taught concealed carry, I've given specific examples of parents that have, oh, my child was supposed to be gone to a party all night, but that child came home because it wasn't comfortable with the drinking and was banging around in the kitchen. Dad came into the kitchen and fired his gun and killed his daughter. I mean, how horrific is that? So I do believe there is a huge balance between personal protection rights and common sense.
Yeah, and this is where the ethic of justice is really important, right? So it's not to say you can't, because you can, but let's just make sure that we're completely informed and ready and trained before you decide to go there. And so I often will just encourage folks. I'll ask actually how often they're firing their firearm. So I take care of a bunch of elderly patients who have been deer hunting since way before I was born. But now that rifle is actually tucked behind their furnace and they haven't fired it in 3 to 5 years. I encourage them to get to the range and shoot their gun. I want people shooting their gun every 6 to 12 months to make sure they still know how to like operate it, because if they go to use it, and as we get older, some of that muscle memory's not there, some of that fine motor's not there. I don't want to hear that you went out to go deer hunting and shot yourself or shot somebody else or had a near miss. So often people ask like, oh man, don't your patients think you're like anti-gun? No way, because when you tell them shoot your gun, they can't ever possibly say you're anti-firearm. And that's the whole point, is I want working familiarity with, thoughtfulness around, and then these really important aspects of safety, like a gun safe. A cable lock actually is a really slick thing as well, because then you can't operate the firearm at all. You know, I think trigger locks, tell me if I'm wrong, Chuck, but it feels like trigger locks, you can kind of jimmy off there if you work hard enough.
You're right. There are some really great options now on the market that are, one of them is referred to as a gun saddle.
Okay.
And so you mount it to the wall into the studs, and you set the firearm in it, close it, and it closes over the complete action. So it closes over the gun, almost like a pancake, and holds that gun in its loving caress until you need it. And that's a great option versus just a standard trigger lock. But I always tell people, in the end, it's better to have something than to not have anything.
Absolutely.
You know, and to key into what you were saying about people training with their firearms. You know, I've taken the word practice out of my terminology when I talk to firearms owners, because I think of practice like band practice, baseball practice, but I think about driver's training and things like that. Things that are more serious, I look at it from a training perspective. So using that terminology, you know, sometimes drives it home better. Also, I have the serious conversation with people who are hemming and hawing about owning a firearm of, well, there are other options. There's pepper spray, there's tasers, because frankly, with our previous talk about, potentially having something go through a wall, it's a lot easier to wash a child's eyes out from pepper spray than it is to take them to the ER with a gunshot.
Yeah, and this is something I actually encourage my patients frequently is actually bear spray, like a high-powered pepper spray. In the event of a break-in, you can flood a hallway with pepper spray, close a door, call 911. And if inadvertently you shoot off the pepper spray at yourself, it's a funny story you can tell your buddy while drinking a beer. If your gun goes off in your face or you shoot a loved one, you may not be having that beer. I also think it's important just to kind of think about what's the intended use of the firearm, because that clearly changes how we're going to do the safe storage component. Ready access versus something you're using infrequently makes a big difference as well. And I think I also encourage folks to keep the ammo separate and locked up. Ammunition is getting really freaking expensive. So I just join with and say, it's crazy expensive. Don't let someone take it. But also, you want to make sure that that's one more slowing thing we can do. If someone somehow gets your firearm, they at least would have to go get their own ammo instead of just kind of boom, boom, and on the way.
I have one more classification of firearm to bring up to you, Doc, and that's this. A lot of people like to hang up wall hangers. Wall hangers are usually something that is an antique. Frankly, a lot of them are just rusty junk, but they're still capable of firing. And people hang them up and they look at them and they think, well, because this is rusty junk, it's not usable. Well, no, it's fully usable. It may blow up the first time you use it, but that could still cause catastrophic injuries. So when you talk about people and they say, oh, no, I've just got some wall hangers up. Well, have they been made inert?
Yeah, this is a great point, Chuck. This is actually exactly what I say to folks. I actually tell a story from a friend of mine who grew up in Oklahoma. His stepfather-in-law, so that's a bit removed, but his wife's stepdad had an occasion to handle the family's Civil War style handgun, which was actually like a front-loading firearm. And everyone thought it was unloaded because it had been just hanging out for the last 40 years. And he lifts it up towards the ceiling and goes, well, isn't that thing a beauty? And the one thing that no one should ever do when handling a firearm, he pulled the trigger. Unless you're intending to shoot, right?
Correct, yeah.
So he acted as though it was unloaded instead of acting as though it was loaded, which is a really important thing we should be doing, is assuming a firearm is loaded unless you absolutely know it's not. He shot a hole in the ceiling of grandma's house, and he's really fortunate he didn't blow his hand off.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And people often forget. And that one is a black powder firearm. Those are ones that people commonly forget to unload at their end of their muzzleloader season. And the only thing that's preventing them from going off is having that little percussion cap. And so if you've got a child who's interested in your firearms and they know when you put this little copper cap on and they pull the trigger, it'll go crack. Hey, I was a kid with the roll caps. Do you remember the roll caps and the little revolvers?
Those were awesome.
And do you also remember putting a whole roll on the ground and smacking it with the hammers?
Yep.
Just because you wanted to see what would happen?
Yep.
That's what kids do, period. So all of a sudden you have this firearm that's been loaded since the last hunting season, and they go, oh, look at this, and show their friend and stick it on there and pull the trigger, and all of a sudden you've got a 50 caliber hole in your wall.
Or worse.
God forbid, a 50 caliber hole in their friend.
Right.
So I think you're doing an absolutely phenomenal job as far as the discussion with firearms goes. I've had some clinicians that I've worked with that have done the whole, are there any guns in the house? Well, yes. Well, how many? Where do you keep them stored?
Yeah, it can become an inquisition, and that's not the
exactly
intention, right? Yeah,
exactly. And so your soft method is by far the best method I have heard for approaching the firearms conversation with a patient.
Oh, thanks, Chuck.
And I've told some clinicians, you might want to change your approach to this because you're going to get the obvious answer of, well, it's none of your darn business. And there are people that coach their children when they go to see the doctor, or they go into the ER, and they say, well, if they ask if we have guns in the house, tell them you have Nerf guns and that's it. Mm-hmm. Well, teaching your children to lie is obviously not beneficial to anyone, but being able to have that conversation with your child and say, yes, my children grew up with guns in the house. I know that's a shocker, but we had guns in our house. They knew where they were stored. They knew how they were stored, but they also knew that they didn't touch them without permission.
So this is important. This is a really important point. I love that you're saying this, Chuck. So I have patients who so a couple things. 42% of homes have a gun. That means 58% don't. So it's important for folks who don't live in a home with firearms to recognize that if their kids are going for a play date, we need some coaching on if you see a firearm. And it's actually like, I want you to take the DNR training so you know how to handle a gun, because the answer is you don't handle a gun when you're a kid. Unless
you have permission.
And you're with a trusted adult, right? And like, there's a purpose. Like we're at the range doing training. We're out hunting. So it's not just like, oh, hey, Bobby's coming over for a sleepover. Let's just like check out the guns for a minute while our parents are like cleaning up after dinner. Like never.
This situation literally happened to my family. My son and my nephew were at my father's house helping him move and pack stuff up. And he was packing up his reloading area and things like that. He and I had to run to the hardware store. When we came back, one of the pistols, the slide had been pulled back. And we looked at it, and my son immediately walked up to me, my youngest, and he was 10, 11 at the time. And he said, no, my cousin, I'm going to leave names out because I don't want to call out my nephew like that now because he's an adult. But he said, my cousin picked it up. And when he picked it up, after I told him not to, I told him to pull back the slide to make sure it wasn't loaded first, at least. And then I left the room and told him he should put it down. And so the first thing he did was inform us when we got back. That was a really responsible way to handle it.
For sure.
And it was good that he knew how that pistol operated and was able to tell him how to make sure it was safe. Because he also knew how to remove the magazine and how to, if he had pulled the slide back and there was a round in the magazine and it would have loaded in the chamber, he knew how to clear that chamber as well. It seems like a whole lot to teach a child, but in the end, children are sponges. Mm-hmm. They will absorb information and learn these things, and they want to. There are a lot of little boys and girls that want to learn about firearms. Mm-hmm. And then there are parents that are like, well, I don't want to start teaching them until they're 11 or 12. Now, I personally feel, and this is my personal, that the kids that learn to shoot with a 22 with their parents standing next to them when they're 7 and 8 years old, and they learn all those safe handling options then, well, they've got 4 years of training ahead of the kid that goes to their first hunter safety class and learns how to handle it there. And I'm a hunter safety instructor. I've seen what a kid at 12 years old who's never handled a firearm can do. It's dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so teaching your children is also key to this. And, we're kind of getting away from the suicide prevention aspect, but this is still firearms injuries within the home. And so I think that this is a huge part of it as well, because what's going to happen with one of these children hurts themselves or someone else?
So Chuck, let me ask you this. It kind of goes here. So I don't think that gun shop owners are immune to suicide loss. I am sure that within your culture and your community, you have lost people to suicide. And I'm wondering, what's the discussion like? Does it change people's viewpoint? Are they thinking more about safe storage? Do they seem more inclined to? Do you think it's a driving force in getting gun shops to participate in the safe storage or the gun shop project?
So, about 6 months before we met, Jean, I had Dane County Sheriff's Office knocking on the door of my gun shop, doing an investigation of a man who was found out in the woods who had committed suicide. He bought the firearm from us. And when he bought the firearm, long story short, he showed zero of the warning signs. My wife actually sold him the firearm, but he showed zero warning signs. And he was a special purchase because he wasn't a U.S. citizen, but he had the ability to purchase a firearm because he was a resident. So he had to go through extra steps to actually purchase the firearm, and he never purchased any ammunition from us. But 5 days later, we find out that he is, had a death by firearm. And once that really hit us, and we had another individual who he had sought help at the VA, did their 3-day psych hold and was given medication, and he gave over his firearms to a trusted family member, but he had one that was a wall hanger because it was broken. Well, when his family member left him, he went down to the hardware store, bought a saw, fixed the broken part, and used that firearm to end his life. And again, it was not only a customer, but it was also a veteran and someone that we knew. So this has touched us and hit us very personally. And so we try to make sure that, we have that conversation when someone seems a little bit off. It's devastating to us. It was incredibly devastating to my wife because she's like, I had no clue. We actually had video footage of him in the shop. No indicators whatsoever. He was acting completely normal the entire time he was in. And we've had this conversation before, Gene, where obviously at that point he had come to terms with the solution that he felt was right for him. And so you almost feel a relief at that point because you're not arguing with yourself whether or not that's the way you want to go. So once he's come to that conclusion and he's made peace with it, we've missed our window of opportunity to help them. And so that's where, as gun shop owners, the Gun Shop Project is an amazing educational tool. The National Shooting Sports Foundation also has a wonderful retailer suicide prevention kit that you can get for free. And it provides you with information. It provides you with pamphlets that you can provide to customers and posters that you can put up. So, there's all kinds of options to be able to educate yourself and your employees as a gun shop owner.
Dr. B, I got to ask you, do you see any positive changes or things that enhancements maybe in clinical settings that have encouraged open discussion? I guess I'm hoping you'll talk a little bit about some of your work in training new residents and talk about what you're doing here in Dane County with that.
Yeah, I think part of this is, when we screen for depression or suicidal ideation, we ask about a plan. The person has a plan. And so the data shows if you ask about suicide, you don't increase risk of actually acting on that plan. So it's really important to educate people that you got to ask. And in asking and talking about, you're not going to push someone towards ending their life. And then it's like a lot of things in primary care. You ask the question and brace for whatever the answer is going to be. And then you're ready to take the next step in the dialogue. And so if the person says, yeah, I'm thinking about an example of a patient of mine who was elderly, was facing the beginning of dementia, and basically told me, when I'm ready to end my life, I have a gun. And so I just asked, hey, where's the gun? And he wouldn't tell me because he said he's going to keep it. And I didn't think he was going to act on it. So I didn't do anything further than just, there was the family. I knew I'd see him back for follow-up. And so the next time I saw him, I said, hey, I got to just check in. Can you remind me where you keep your gun? And he told me, it's in a box on the top shelf of my closet. I looked right at his son who was with us, dagger eyes, go get the gun, so that his father could not act on it. And then sure enough, followed up and family removed the firearm from that space. The gentleman never actually commented to me about his firearm being removed. I don't think he was ever actually going to act on it. I think he just wanted to know he had that as an option. And so the idea, though, is we have to ask, be ready, and also knowing about other resources and helping direct people to know that someone can store their firearm at a gun shop is really helpful, because it's doing more than just saying, I'm not coming for your gun. It's showing that what we're going to do is just hand that thing off and give it a timeout while we're not feeling like we can have it safely within our home, or that we can have safe access to it. And so it's a voluntary thing. It's in no way gun control. It's not a seizure of a firearm. It's really something that someone can do to make sure that they're kind of caring for themselves in that moment. And I think having these things in place and being aware of them is helpful. I think one next step we could take, more than just educating the folks who are in healthcare, is to actually make resources available in some of the exam rooms. And I think that's one of the big pushes we want to have. There's only so much space in every exam room, and there's a lot of competing interests, but certainly important to make sure that these resources are available to our patients. We can make them aware of them.
So do you get pushback when you talk about having the conversation about firearms? I mean, I'm sure as a physician, there's everyone would like you to talk about their pet cause, you should ask about. There are important things, domestic violence and, safety in the home. And there are many competing interests. Do you hear often from your colleagues that there just really isn't time? And are there barriers that perhaps we in the community could work at to help so that physicians either have the time or the knowledge or the ability to talk about that? And you had talked about even having the conversation initially with residents, so very new doctors. And how do they feel about talking about firearms? Is it something they're okay with? Is this part of a new generation, or is it something that they're kind of a little nervous about?
Yeah, they're freaked out. So really, I think one of the biggest barriers is, if you look at the data, physicians have really low gun ownership. So many physicians aren't familiar with firearms. And so some of the work that I have been doing, I've actually had a chance to present at the physician assistant program as well, and then to our residents. But some of the work we're going to do is actually getting some hands-on firearm experience and training for our healthcare professionals. So I'm not saying people have to shoot a gun, though shooting a firearm is actually really fun. Like, there's really something, like, I get the sport of it. I understand. I didn't grow up in a hunting household, but let me tell you, shooting a firearm can be really cool. I totally understand it. And so trying to get people some hands-on experience, and then also like handling an unloaded and very, very safe firearm, and talking about a trigger lock, cable lock, what's a gun safe, and just giving people a chance to understand what that's all about. And then a chance, if they want to go ahead and get a little bit of just brief training on how to use a firearm. I think that's going to be helpful. And mostly because the biggest barrier is people feeling like if it's not in their wheelhouse, it's not their area of expertise, they don't want to go there. They don't want to talk about it because they don't want to misspeak. Because for a lot of healthcare professionals, getting it right is really, really important. And even if they think they might get it like 90% right, it's probably not good enough. I mean, you don't want a surgeon who gets it 90% right? You like want the appendix all the way out, not like 90% of the way out. So you get that perfectionism. And we need to just help folks overcome that with a little bit of, I think, hands-on lived experience.
Now, Dr. Bingham, if you ever need an outline for that, I've actually done these presentations with a couple EMS squads, especially after concealed carry became prevalent, because there are times as medical professionals, you come across a firearm from whether an accident or anything like that, and you may have a patient that's in an altered state of mind that you need to relieve them of that firearm safely and be able to store it safely.
Yeah.
So
I also, when I ask about this, I don't document anything. So I put nothing in the chart when I ask about firearms, because I just want to have a dialogue. So I actually, my posture is pushed away from the computer and just like eye contact, having a discussion. So I'm not clicking away, adding stuff. And some people would maybe stylistically say they don't like that because they want to be able to keep tabs on these things. Personally, I just keep asking. I'm always asking because it's dynamic and ownership can change. And so just because I asked you 5 years ago doesn't mean you didn't just buy a hunting rifle because you want to, get back to deer hunting. So I'm trying to ask on the regular, make it really conversational, and then just giving kind of practical, pragmatic tips with really it is a gentle touch. It's not coming at somebody aggressively by any means.
I think it's the perfect approach.
So I don't know. Chuck may be familiar with this, but I know probably Dr. Bingham is. There's something called Counseling on Access to Lethal Means, and it's one of many programs usually aimed at clinicians or physicians to help them pick up tools about talking about firearm and firearm safety with their patients. I don't know if you've participated in any of that training or have any thoughts on that. It's something here at Safe Communities that we're trying to promote so that people feel like they have an ability to learn more. As you said, I appreciate that physicians are experts in their field, but it's a big field to become an expert in firearms. So that's why I'm always grateful to have people like Chuck where, I don't know the answer. Let me refer you to the firearm expert. And we've talked a lot about that in suicide prevention, that even as a person offering to help someone through a crisis, you needn't be the firearm experts. You just need to know where to go, which is why we're so grateful for gun shops that have stepped up and said, we're not your therapist, but I'm everything about finding a way to keep your firearm safe in a way that's respectful to you. And as I said earlier, puts the person in the driver's seat about how it's going to be. Specifically, safe storage. Dr. B, you said, wouldn't it be nice if you had something in the office? And at Safe Communities, we do have a palm card specifically about options for gun storage. And it's something Chuck and I worked on along with another group. And I'll tell you, as much as, I'm an advocate for safe storage in the program. Let's see. I think we're number 2 on the list. So one way that we suggest to people is that they turn over all their firearms to a trusted family member or friend who lives elsewhere. So in other words, get them out of the house, put the firearms with someone who's able to legally hold on to the firearms. And we also, of course, recommend that the guns are unloaded at that time. We think that that's one way that people may feel most comfortable.
It's the simplest practice.
Yeah. And I think it probably happens informally. Do you believe that, Chuck?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We hear about it all the time in the shop where, my buddy's got my rifle at his house because my wife didn't want me to have it in the house.
Mm-hmm. All right. So it's not uncommon or unreasonable to ask a firearm owner to temporarily transfer them over.
Not at all.
I hear that too. I hear that a lot.
That it's just out of the home.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Excellent. And then, of course, we do recommend that you contact a gun shop, particularly one that participates in the program. So here in Dane County, we have 2 gun shops that we've identified, but Chuck alluded to earlier, the Veterans Administration for the state of Wisconsin has started a program called Live Today, Put It Away, where they've created an interactive map that creates dots which show gun shops throughout the state that are willing to participate in safe storage. So we
currently have 30 gun shops participating.
30. Wow. Nice number.
Well, I'd love for it to be triple that, but 30 is a great start.
And I know that the goal is to have at least 1 or 2 gun shops in every county in Wisconsin so that nobody would have to drive more than perhaps 30 minutes to get their gun to a shop that could offer them the safe temporary storage. So we certainly hope that people who are gun shop owners, or if you know someone it is, would consider being part of this program. We also really appreciate the interplay between the medical community and the gun shops, like you were talking about, Chuck, how you're kind of already connected with public health. I think that's very important.
Well, one thing that I try to always express to especially public health or to the medical community is, everybody tries to villainize the firearm at this point. A gun's an inanimate object. It can only express the intent of the user holding it. So if we teach them that, then maybe that takes some of the, demonizing of the firearm away from the medical professional, because I understand there are a lot of medical professionals that want zero to do with firearms. Completely understand that. Their passion is in life-saving, and a firearm is often indicated as a life-taking tool, but it's not. It's an inanimate object. And the more you can express that to them, the better it is.
One of the questions someone had was, it's sort of general, and you kind of talked about it. So what's the best way to talk to gun owners about safe storage. Do you feel comfortable actually saying, hey, this is an option? And if you had a pamphlet, would you talk about it? Or do you feel that just talking about it in the most general sense and talking about safe storage each time, all the time, that it's part of the conversation is an easier way to kind of ingrain it into a habit?
I talk about it all the time, and I actually just hop online and look at Amazon for different options of what people can purchase. And then I point them back to where they're buying their ammo. Because wherever you're buying your ammo has some sort of safe storage device. And so, and maybe you've got a relationship with the guy at Cabela's or the lady at Cabela's or at the gun shop that you visit. And so, again, I'm not the expert, but what I want to do, and I actually recognize all I'm doing is brainstorming to help create some momentum towards a behavior change that's going to lead to a safer environment for the person. And so I just get the ball rolling and then just try to nudge the person to take that next step. So part of this is also recognizing I'm not an expert in all things. And so knowing when to kind of broaden the bench and kind of tag my teammate. And I think recognizing a gun shop owner is part of my team is something that is important for us as clinicians. I'd love to see every county have a gun shop that's participating. It seems like if the answer is $1,200 for a fireproof or fire resistant safe, seems like a really great way for the state of Wisconsin to spend some money to save some lives.
It's a cheap investment for a life.
And I'm not making there's an election coming up. It's not a political statement. Just it feels like the return on investment there.
Absolutely. There's been talk about that. And it's talk about how suicide prevention coalitions can also be writing grants and using some of their funding for that.
Yep.
I want to open this up now to people who are listening live to tell them that we welcome the questions they have. We've had kind of a wonderful ranging conversation, and I'm sure that they have questions that they feel like they want to ask too. And I also wanted to promote something that I know Dr. Bingham's doing along with a gun shop in Dane County. He is looking to have some of his residents have an opportunity to go to a gun shop as part of their training, as part of their, am I right? It's part of their kind of community medicine training. And the idea would be not only to talk about safe storage, to talk about firearms, but to then have an opportunity to actually hands-on talk about it, or hands-on work on it.
Yeah, so we just opened it up, and some of the PA students are also going to attend with us. So it's a chance to go and see how things go for folks. And then I also am hopeful that we're going to open it up to faculty physicians as well, because in medicine, you're always a learner. It's not just the residents and the students who need ongoing education. And so my hope is to actually give some of my colleagues a chance down the road as well. But yeah, we're doing that later this winter with the residents in the PA school as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you both for having this ranging conversation. I want to wrap it up, and I want to mention some resources that are available, and there's a little bit of additional information. So I did talk a little bit about CALM training. You can see here it's listed. It takes about an hour. It's free training. You'll notice that it draws much from what we've talked about today, talking about the interplay between firearms and suicide deaths. Safe Communities and the Gun Shop program in Dane County is also available as an option. The state of California has a training that's free and offers CME credits called Bullet Point. And that can be something not just for clinicians and physicians. This is important information for anyone who works in the community. I'm thinking, for example, oftentimes an agency may have to be making judgment calls or policies on how they're going to handle firearms. For example, if you provide a service on whether firearms will be permitted at your avenue of where you do your business. And so I think taking some of this training and learning some of these techniques and the role of suicide prevention is important. And then we have a final slide that talks about safe storage of firearms during a crisis. As I talked about earlier, here in Dane County, Max Creek Outdoors offers. They're our primary partner. It used to be Chuck. I wish you were still here in Dane County, but we're very glad to have you up north as a safe storage site, and Mountain Man Guns in Cambridge. The website, the BeThereWisconsin.com, that is also part of the VA program for safe storage. And I want you to know that even though it is kind of flagged as something through the VA program, that the shops listed on the Be There Wisconsin interactive map will offer safe storage to anyone. It is not just veterans. It is to anyone in the community. And you'll also notice that they've recently started a second map, and that is law enforcement that will offer safe temporary storage of firearms. Chuck made a good point. Some people don't feel comfortable turning over their firearms to law enforcement. However, some indeed may. So it's an option to have out there. So I think that's about all the time we have. And I think we'll be able to continue to have a discussion by having emails sent to me, and we'll have that information. So anyone at the end who has additional questions would be able to email me, and we'll put that slide up later. So Chuck, any last minute thoughts in the time we have?
Well, I want to circle back to one of the questions that you asked Dr. Bingham earlier, and that was, how do you approach this? The Army used to teach us this ACE program, ask, counsel, and then escort to help. And that's kind of the approach that I try to counsel other gun shop owners on, is be blunt, be honest with them. If you're kind of working your way around the outside edge of it of, oh, what do you think you're possibly going to do? And you're hemming and hawing, you're not really benefiting the person at all, and realize that, and I completely understand that not every gun shop owner is going to have the same passion for this as I do. I've lost family members. I've lost friends and fellow veterans to suicide. I'm incredibly passionate about it, but have that hard conversation. You may upset the person. Unfortunately, that's just part of that conversation, but you may also bring their mind into it and say, yeah, maybe I do need that help. Maybe I do need that time away. Thank you guys so much for having me as part of this conversation. It was an absolutely amazing experience, and I'm looking so forward to seeing where this goes.
And how about you, Dr. Bingham? Any closing thoughts as we kind of wrap up this discussion?
Yeah, so thanks for the chance to participate. Chuck, thanks for all you shared. I've learned so much today. I think the biggest thing is just recognize the importance of this topic. And we can't, as healthcare providers, we can't have our own discomfort around a topic like firearm ownership get in the way of the care that we're charged with providing. And so I think it's important, just like we need to get trained in all sorts of things to be competent and compassionate providers, we all need to be taking steps to overcome a barrier. And I think if I can be real, just recognizing we have a bit of a bias and a bit of a blind spot here. And so it's important for us to move towards this, because this is our culture, the culture in which we find ourselves practicing. Our job isn't to change necessarily the culture, but just to help make sure that we're keeping people safe and informed, so they can actually live meaningful, productive lives. And if we can prevent illness, that's actually why I went into medicine, is to actually optimize health for folks. So I'd rather be preventing than trying to treat and put back together after something catastrophic happens. Right. And I'm hopeful for the future. I believe we're going to make some strides on this. So thank you so much for the chance to share today.
All I can say is, wow, this was so informative. I want to thank you all so much, Dr. Bingham, Chuck, and Jean, for this oh my God. So much learning took place today. So much, I hope, a grasp of knowledge took place today. And like you said, prevention and help, because we don't want anyone else to die from gun suicide. So thanks to all for joining us today. I want to thank our sponsors for this amazing webinar series on ending deaths from despair, our webinar series. And we hope you attend a future webinar and spread the word to others in Dane County. Have a great afternoon, and thank you.